Yeah, I like this one here. Listen up. So many times in my life.
Okay, good. So let me give you all a disclaimer. I wanted to do this because my heart has been broken. It has been heavy with the events that have taken place within our country. And at the core of my being, I am an educator. And so I felt the need to use my platform, my influence, to shed some light on what it's like being Black in America. And so I wrote a piece earlier this week that went out nationally. I've talked to some of my friends and colleagues, and we just kind of just spent this week lamenting about what is taking place in our country. And so God dropped this in my spirit, and I hit my brother and sisters. I was like, hey, let's get on and let's do this. And they both agreed and wanted to do this. So some ground rules, even though I gave the professional background of who we are, I'm not boxing us into our professional boxes right now. This is a space for us. We gonna be ourselves. You gonna hear some double negatives. Some what you ain't gonna do is coming from Monica. My brother David probably gonna prophesy a little bit. So we're taking off our professional hats because it's after 5 o'clock and we're having a conversation. Listen, Monica, you talk a lot about your background. We talk about it a lot. You growing up in Mississippi. So my question to both of you, when did you find out you were Black and that it meant something?
Oh, Jesus.
So oddly enough, back in March, right before the Rona hit and shut everything down, I actually did a TED Talk about my experience coming to understand being Black and a woman.
So wait, let me stop you right there because we're not gonna let you say that. Like I did a TED Talk and just let it slide through. My sister did a TED Talk. It was phenomenal. I went to it in Bloomington. It was phenomenal. It will be released sometime this summer. I don't know what they're waiting on because everybody been quarantined at home. They could have had it edited and up by now. But my sister had the honor of doing the TED Talk. So continue.
In the next couple of days, actually, it's been submitted. So waiting for the rest of the world to see that. But in the TED Talk, I talk about how in the second grade, I transitioned to my very first of many dominantly white private schools. And I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. Many people know that back in 2011, there was this Oscar nominated movie that is treacherously problematic, if we're being all the way real, called The Help. Well, The Help was centered in the neighborhood of my private elementary school. And I remember meeting my first white friend, and when we were going to get picked up that day, I noticed that she was getting picked up by a Black woman. Now, again, I was in the second grade. I was spending a lot of time with my grandparents, watching In the Heat of the Night and Young and the Restless and Knots Landing and all of these things. So I assumed that the Black lady was the girl's mama and she was just real light skinned, right? I was kind of confused. And I remember going home and telling my grandmother that I met a new friend and she was a white girl, but that her mama was Black. And I distinctly remember the pain in my grandmother's face when she had to basically explain to me in the second grade the concept of mammying. And going back to school to confirm that with my friend, because you know, when you young, your parents don't know nothing. I don't know what these people talk about. They're not telling the truth. And I asked her if the lady was her mammy, and she said yes, and invited me to come to her house. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold up, I got to have a clear understanding here. If I come to your house, do I have to be your mammy too? And the girl said, I don't know. The most innocent of conversations, because the reality is she didn't. She was my first white friend. I probably was her first Black friend, and no one had fully uncovered all the complexities of the space that we were living in, which in the 1980s was Jackson, Mississippi, post Civil War, post, segregation. We were living in a new world order where people were figuratively equal, right? But even in that world, it was very clear to me that being both Black and being a woman meant that how I navigated the world was different.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that carried me throughout all of the rest of K through 12 education, all of my experience as a college student, whether I knew it or not, right? I'm framing my whole identity around this initial conversation of what it means to be a Black woman working. So even as I navigate in my adulthood with all these degrees and so on and so forth, there's still a silent call for me to take care of, and I said this in the TED Talk, a call for me to take care of all masses chilling, and to love on them and be their person, right? But what is there left for me? And so as a Black woman, I consistently navigate that, whether I name that or let people know in circles as they interact with me. The truth is that I navigate in that way. And I would guess that a lot of other Black women do the same.
So David, just to kind of piggyback off of Monica's experience growing up, you have 5 young boys that you are raising. How are you raising your sons in this climate?
Well, four that directly live in my house, and I have an oldest son, Caden, who's 13, who lives in Philly with his mom and his stepfather. But these 4 boys in my house, thinking about the reality that one day when they get older and they are more muscular and more manly looking, because they mature our Black babies, our Black boys and our Black girls a lot quicker than their ages, right?
Yeah.
That one day they'll be tweeners or teenagers and we'll be going to the movies and white folks will be getting nervous. I mean, there's always a reality for us, but like this reality that Monica speaks about, this structured reality or nature of reality in which it does not benefit us to see ourselves through one lens, right? This notion that she talks about being a Black woman, right? This notion that me being a Black man, knowing that racism is more than just about race, like it's about sexism as well. And to separate this conversation and just talk about racism without talking about the intersectionality of racism, it's like trying to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without putting jelly on the sandwich. Like it's incomplete. And you get this incomplete narrative and you don't look at the ways look, when they used to lynch us, it was a sexualized experience. They used to cut our balls off. That was a sexist experience. So racism was never just this racist issue or phenomenon. It was always centered in this erotic, sexist desire to emasculate or to sexualize and eroticize these bodies. So for my little boys, this 13-year-old that we have, this 18-year-old that we have, these 6-year-old twins that we have, right? And this 3-year-old that we have in our house, I'm always thinking about the ways in which they will be objectified and eroticized as Black bodies. The object of somebody's white gaze in an effort to fulfill some type of untalked about desire to see if what they've been taught about Black bodies is really true. That just scares the heck out of me.
So Monica, on Friday, we all met and talked over Zoom, and you made a statement and you said Black folks don't have the luxury of securing spaces of comfort and ownership. You remember that?
I do. I do.
Talk a little bit about that.
So a couple of things, and all of these issues and statements touch each other. So across things that I might say, or you might say, or David might say, there is a connectivity throughout this conversation. But I'm reminded of a quote from Audre Lorde, and I wrote it down earlier, and it says, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." And the reality of all of this is that I can't afford to just have a monolithic, heteronormative, patriarchal, pro-Black stance, because my life is not fully heteronormative, cis-normative, and pay, like all of the issues that impact my entire community impact me. And there is not a space that we are allowed to claim that is specifically ours that we don't have to put a name on it.
Yeah.
And the truth is that when you own a whole system, you don't have to write your name on your stuff. So when we think about white frat houses and white sorority houses, we never call them white frat houses.
Yeah.
We call them frat houses and sorority houses. But for Black folk stuff, we have to say, a Black organization. This is a when at IU, when the Black Culture Center began, they were calling it what? The Black House.
The Black House.
The Black House.
My goodness.
But even as it was called the Black House, we put our name on it, but we ain't own it. What spaces are there truly for Black safety? We can't be safe in the church.
Oops.
And if we want to take that a little bit deeper, all of us weren't welcome in the church in the first place. Let's go ahead and be honest, be real, that the church is not a space where all Black people feel safe. Christianity isn't a space that all Black people hold dear. But when we were conditioned to pretend as if there are no edges to us, only straight lines, we naturally began alienating parts of our community. And since one person can't hold a piece, none of us can hold it. So we are in a world saying, see me. See me as human. See me as a body that deserves to have rights. If there's not a space where we were ever envisioned to have those rights, why would people think we would naturally get them? And I think about again being a little girl under my grandparents' tutelage and having them say things like, "Ain't nothing new under the sun." Ain't nothing that's happening now that ain't happened before. But since we haven't passed that knowledge down, we are surprised that it is now happening to us when it was always designed to.
David, this question is for you. So we were talking about raising our children on our conversation on Friday, and you mentioned a Ta-Nehisi Coates quote where you said white folks are taught mastery and Black folks are taught discipline and compliance. Break that down.
Yeah. So listen, if you haven't read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, where he writes this book to his teenage son, that truly just lays bare this reality of American capitalism through this idea of the American dream. You need to do it, right? But he critiques the educational system, specifically comparing education in urban spaces with education in suburban spaces, right? And then he kind of lays bare this reality that in these suburban spaces, the lawn is manicured and the spaces are clean, and the students are taught mastery, that the cosmos and the galaxy belongs to you. Whereas in urban spaces, we are taught tolerance and control. And then he says, I see education in the hood and prison as two sides of the same coin. He says, you slip up in the school, your behind will be found on the streets. And I'm paraphrasing, right? And then you get swallowed up in the streets, and then you find yourself in incarcerated surroundings, in prisons, right? So he was talking about the ways in which how white folks in suburban spaces teach their kids mastery, even by revisionist history, right? Even by this historical amnesia, that they're taught this revisionist version of history where they're taught dominance and control. Right? And then Black folks, we're navigating the fact that we're under resources, got 3 to 4 people using the same old antiquated book, right? And we're focusing on making sure that our children are disciplined, that they have the tools and self-control needed to make it in white America. And Coates was critiquing it and talking about how they teach dominance and control, and we teach discipline. And I think that's a hallmark of, I mean, now granted, I think that I have to teach my sons how to navigate, right, white America, right? But at the same time, I think we need to, and as I was told this recently by a prominent scholar in Georgia, because I was talking to her about my dissertation work, and I was using this German philosopher to think through like a particular aspect of my research. But at the same time, she was like, David, it sounds good, right? But you missing a large experience if you do not take the time to remember the things that you have been taught to forget through your educational experiences. She said, our experiences, and this Joyce King was person, she said, our experiences as Black folk navigating these educational institutions in the United States have strategically stripped us of everything that has been passed through us and passed down to us from our ancestors. It seeks to make us to forget everything that's ingrained in our natural DNA. So I think that as Black folk, as Black educators, we have to be willing to engage in remembering and centering Africanist ways of knowing and being, so that we can reclaim these collectivist traditions of resistance that are in the foundation of what makes us African. Ideas of collectivism and interdependence as values that should be ascribed to instead of competition and independence.
I told y'all he was gonna preach. He always got to preach in him, always. So this question is for both of you. We're gonna switch gears a little bit, but I think they all correlate. So over the weekend, there were riots, and I call them rebellions, that took place across the country. One specifically in Atlanta, and I noticed that Mayor Keisha Bottoms, she called on the hip hop community to bring calm to the city of Atlanta. So here's my question. Has the Black church lost its place as the epicenter of the civil rights movement?
What you doing?
I'm asking a question. I'm legit asking a question. If you really think about Atlanta, where Martin Luther King resided and was the leader of the civil rights movement, we had all these meetings in the church, and the church was a sacred space collectively to talk about these issues. And then noticing how she had Killer Mike, and she's calling on T.I. to bring the city together, and others that are down there in the hip hop community to bring them together. Has the church lost its place within the civil rights movement? And I'll get to this other question later, but I think y'all gonna tie into it, but I'm gonna get to this other question later.
So look, I am here for Mayor Keisha. I was very excited, though I do not live in Atlanta, when Mayor Keisha was elected, Keisha Lance Bottoms. I have appreciated her commentary, the way that she has been present throughout all of the COVID-19 epidemic in her city. And I know that she made some statements that were that folks are finding problematic at this point, specifically around the idea of the destruction of property and looting that is taken throughout this this era of unrest. But Mayor Keisha is still a politician, and she has a job to do within the system, and I believe that she is doing that work. So that is what I will say about Mayor Keisha.
You got a however comma.
And however comma dot. I think and there's been a lot of conversation specifically. I believe, was it T.I. that said that Atlanta was now Wakanda? And though Atlanta has for a very, very long time thrived off the backs of Black people and Black products, Atlanta is still not Wakanda in many ways, shapes, and forms. I'm not going to say in any way. In many ways, shapes, and forms, Atlanta is not Wakanda. But I think that the strategy that Keisha Lansbottom utilized was to bring individuals that were overwhelmingly relatable to her constituents forward to be able to disseminate a message that would bring her city back within the order as it is her responsibility as the mayor. However, on the question that you asked, I feel like I had to get all of those footnotes out so that we could have the conversation that we finna have. For a long time, the Black church has lost membership, I don't want to use the term failed, but I shall, failed to convert youth who were raised within their walls into long-standing participants and members of their communities. They have not grown. I'm painting with a broad brush at this point. The Black church has not grown to support a generation of children who are not of the mindset that just because you tell me to do it and understand it, I'm supposed to do it. Do it because I said do it does not necessarily work with these people. And because there has not been a consistent evolution with pending generations, the youth have found ways to connect their spirituality and their relationship with God that does not necessarily go by way of the 11 a.m. service on Sunday. And we also, back to my original point about Black being non-monolithic, there was not just folks who identified themselves as Christian within the civil rights movement. It just so happened that the folks whose names we remember from that time happened to be religious leaders. So we're talking about, of course, at this point, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, even though Malcolm X was Nation of Islam or identified himself as Muslim. So there are all those things at the same time. I think it is difficult for the Black church to be present and in leadership for this specific revolution when so much of the doctrine of the Black church has been, we would be all right if we dressed up a little bit, if we didn't have sagging pants, back, if women wasn't in charge, and so much of that, to call it what it is, white supremacy and patriarchy and heteronormative, cis-normative control of the Black church has alienated pretty much all the people who are leading this new wave of movement. If we talk about Black Lives Matter and don't center Black queer women in the front of those things or allow them to have space, how are you going to be in leadership of a new movement or even assist with a new movement? I mean, and that's, I'm not throwing salt. I'm just saying what I'm saying. Because as much as Black queer, Black trans folks have taken the brunt of the pain, the assault from Black Christian communities, they also have been the main ones out on the front lines, laying out the platforms and doing the work. So you got to get that together before you start, organizing your picket rallies and sign. Go on, because I feel like I done said too much.
Girl, somebody said they're gonna send you an offering. Listen. So then here's my next question. David, I'll toss this one to you.
She got me in my seat. I can't.
Listen, I am fortunate enough to go to a church where I have my pastor, my leaders. We talk about these issues over the pulpit and the platform. We have women who are pastors. My mom is a pastor at the church too. So we see women in leadership. We talk about these issues of racial injustice, white supremacy often in my church. And just talking to you guys on Friday, I realized that was a luxury for me, that there are some people who church leaders are silent. So David, what do you have to say about the silence of church leaders?
What else is it to say?
Not just Black leaders, because there are some churches with white leaders with a very diverse congregation. Also,
I got a primary responsibility to my people first and foremost. Like the reality is, I think that the Black church, in many respects, has lost its prophetic fire. I think in many respects, we have fell prey to the same pursuit of the American dream that holds us captive to a racist, sexist, capitalistic society. I see it operating. And look, folks that go to Faith Tabernacle Church hear this all the time, right? I see it in the prosperity gospel, where I see more prophets prophesying about you about to get a new car than prophesying a judgment upon the earth because of racism. Like, what kind of twisted disease theology is it that your prophetic words are more centered around materialism than they are speaking truth to power about the social realities of our day? But yeah, I mean, I think it's given. I think it is true that the church has failed, right? That the church has failed because it has not been willing, like she said, to evolve, but it also has not been willing to handle and negotiate with the skeletons in his closet. The racist, sexist, capitalistic, colonialistic idea that is foregrounded in the very soul of the Western church. Let me mute my mic.
Listen, you hype now. You hype. So the question I asked.
I ain't even answered. My bad.
No, I moved on to the next one. So where are the sacred spaces for healing and organizing?
So let me say this. Lots of people want to have town halls. Lots of people want to get people in a room, open up a chat, so that folks can come and scream and cry, and that agents of white supremacy can say, I'm sorry. And the revolutionary truth about that is that those spaces are not created to heal Black souls. Those spaces are created so that folks can feel as if they did something, that they can get their Girl Scout badge for social justice and racism. And it's not that those spaces aren't necessary. It's not that there aren't places. I mean, I direct the Black Culture Center. The Black Culture Center, from its founding out of the protest of students, let's be honest, was literally created so that Black folk, after spending a whole day of being in unwanted territory, can come in, take off all of this, and not have to, at the base, explain their humanity to those around them. Yeah. So if we are, and as a higher education professional, I am saying this, if we are creating morning rooms, town hall spaces, so that folks can come and lay their burdens down with the expectation to be healed, and we don't have the capacity to heal them, then we are doing harm. That is malpractice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, folks can go where they find home. But the issue with being young, being there, young, a college student coming into my own and knowing where those places are and knowing that they're genuine places is difficult. Because 9 times out of 10, if somebody tells you this is a safe space, come here, it ain't safe. You've got to know for yourself what's safe. You've got to know for yourself that this is a place where you can go and not put on airs to be cared for or to be loved. If I have to tell you I'm angry in a specific way, you honestly have no interest in me being angry.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to tell you I'm in pain and the only way that you would receive it is if I am not yelling or screaming or that my subjects and verbs always agree, then you have no interest in my pain. You are adding harm. How many times have people gone to town halls talking about Black Lives Matter and to have somebody stand up and say, but you know, what you're really trying to say is, I don't need you to white explain my anger or my pain.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't need you to bring me here to ask me questions about, well, don't you agree that people shouldn't be looting and tearing up and burning down people? Like, because let's be honest, when we say we're coming to a town hall, that's what we walking into. And there's no way to guarantee that that's not. And we've seen it so many times. How many times have y'all done a town hall that gets completely hijacked and people leave more hurt, harmed, and raw than they came in?
So listen, so then what does freedom and liberation look like?
Freedom first comes in realizing that Blackness is beautiful. I think Bell Hooks talks about this in that book, Black Looks, Race and Representation. She talks about this. Now she's speaking specifically to Black women, but I think that prophetically she was speaking to everybody, right? Mm-hmm. I think the hallmark of Black feminism and especially womanism, like it originates in this radical sense of self-love, but it sees this sense of self-love as essential to see the liberation of all folks, right? So Bell Hooks was talking specifically to Black women and saying that we need to be willing to change the way that we see ourselves, right? Because you can't unsee what you've seen already. So all the images that you've seen on the screen, everything that you've heard have impacted your sense of self. So we first need to realize that we are beautiful and then be willing to see ourselves oppositionally, because that reality itself, that I am beautiful, is an oppositional stance, right? Yeah. So first starting in this place that Blackness is beautiful, that Blackness is purposeful, and then at the same time, knowing that you come from a beautiful ancestral people.
Yes.
Ancestral land. And I think that's a prerequisite for healing, is seeing ourselves, be willing to see ourselves oppositionally, and then admit that as Black people, to bring forth and center the witness and wisdom of Audre Lorde, that we have loyalties that we need to examine.
Yes.
In Sister Outsider, there's a place in Sister Outsider where she was specifically lamenting the reality that in her classes she had mostly white students, but who was attending to the Black students that were teaching in New York at the time, and their learned loyalties because of being educated in these historically white spaces, right? So I think as Black people, if we want to love ourselves, we got to realize that most of us have been educated in a system that in many respects has taught us to hate ourselves.
Correct.
Our bodies. So,
correct.
So we gotta figure out how to love ourselves. And then also got to reclaim this narrative that, I'm at the end of the day, I think that we have a very rich, even if you're not religious, like we have a very profound spiritual tradition that is Blackness, right? That connects us to this larger intergenerational web and witness of ancestors. Yeah. And we have to realize that we have a legacy of ancestors that if we would just engage in what Robin D.G. Kelly calls freedom dreaming and think about the ways in which ancestors, those who we know and those who we don't know, to center in this space, my big sister, Tabitha Jones Jolivet, those who we know and those who we don't know, then we will have glimpse of a reality of where we have all of this wisdom to draw upon and to help us to learn what does it mean to truly be Black and love myself and engage in the freedom struggle. And I think that's important first. That's the first most important thing.
Monica, you got something to add?
As he was talking, I was remembering Bell Hooks and Teaching to Transgress talking about the difference in her education journey from being in a all Black school with all Black teachers, and her teachers specifically teaching her for her liberation. And the question would be, what is the purpose of education? And if education is not for liberation, then why are we investing in it? Why are we participating in it? And if we don't see, and when I say this, I am not being one of those people that is saying, you got to have a college degree to be somebody, because, you know, after the first degree and the second degree, and Lord help me, I'm getting the third. Y'all done finished. Y'all PhD, I'm almost done. But after all of that, there are people who haven't been to nobody's school who got more good sense to be free.
Yeah.
Right? To be free, to know that there is, and my mama used to say it, and I used to roll my eyes. If you only read what they told you to read, you're gonna be dumb like they wanted you to be.
Yeah.
So it's about taking in what you have been given, but also taking in what has been strategically taken and separated from you.
Intentionally silenced. Yeah.
So I think that, and I always say, I think we have a lot to learn from the folks who are younger than us. Because if we are being all the way 100, if it wasn't for the young folk, we wouldn't have known what to do for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
Living and working on social media, operating via Zoom, operating from home, setting up workspaces, being able to be digitally native, all of this stuff is young folk, right? And so much of our collectivist history is education. And I don't even want to say it like this. So much of the history that was left for us has been education being a one-way street. It is passed down to you, right? Knowledge comes down. The truth is that thing is a multi-directional highway. I have a 2-year-old that I learn from on a daily basis. Much of my education thus far in liberation and Black liberation theology has only been made real because I have a 2-year-old who got some sense, who pushes back on things that I've been conditioned to instill in her. How many of us have been conditioned to not have conversations with our children? We've been conditioned to say, you do it because I say you do it. Not having a back and forth, not so much a debate, but a dialogue. She's not the only one being helped by the fact that we can talk to each other. I can see her freedom.
Say that again. You said what?
I can see her freedom. And also recognize that at one point I too was free.
Wow.
My freedom will come from being in the street. My freedom is going to come from me internally recognizing that there are spaces in my mind I've been conditioned not to open. There are conversations that I've been conditioned not to have. And it's like being younger and telling my mama, they said that I can't do this and that. It would bother my soul. She would say, who is they? Who said we can't do this? Who said we can't think that? Who said we can't have that?
Mm-hmm.
Just because that's the lie they told themselves don't mean that's the lie I gotta believe. Well, I think when we talked on Friday, I talked about how when the child walks into the room, there's an expectation that if it is not a space for her that is comfortable, that there ought to be a way that she can secure her comfort. And we as a people, Black people, have not been conditioned in that way, that we have the right to secure our own comfort. We just have to adapt, be mutable to what the world gives us. I don't want to do that anymore. I have the right to walk in and say, this is the life that I deserve. I deserve to be able to go out in my car and not be afraid of having lights behind me. I deserve to be able to go into a store and not be afraid that people are going to categorize me as a criminal by walking in. I deserve to be comfortable, but that's not the reality of Blackness in America right now. Nor has it ever been, if we're gonna be all the way honest. There were Black people who existed here on this continent before 1619.
Yeah.
That ain't in nobody's book. When you talk about Black people in America, where you gonna start? Slavery.
My God.
So even in my conditioning in an American high school, the only way that I know my people could get here was on the slave ship. Whether that was true or not. The only way my people could navigate in these spaces before 1862, 1865 was as slaves, whether that was true or not. It's people in college coming to understand the difference of being free and Black in the 1600s. They didn't think it was a thing. They saw 12 years of slave and got confused. But that's part of the radical unlearning. Not only that we need to do as Black people, that everyone who so-called lives in this country needs to do. Because it's not just my history, it's y'all history too.
What would you say to someone who is looking for tools to radically unlearn, to radically go after their freedom? What would you tell them? Where would you tell them to start? What would you tell them to do?
Trust Black women. Listen to Black women. Oh, wait. I wasn't supposed to say that.
Come on and trust us. Trust us.
Trust us, but don't expect us to bear the brunt of your learning.
My God, come on here.
I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible to man-made the world.
No God.
I don't have to bring you into the tit to love you into being a better you. There's a library.
Yes.
There's Google. There's also Google Scholar so that you can find sources that have been critically reviewed.
Monica, listen, when I say trust Black women, I mean, resist this temptation to automatically go to Howard Thurman, Martin Luther King, W.E. Du Bois, you know, like all of these Black men, you know, who played a role. How about you look up Ella Baker?
Yes.
How about you look up,
Fannie Lou
Hamer, Truth. Like, how about you look up these Black women who the really reason why, hell, we don't even want to talk about how, all right, whatever. All right, look up and listen to the wisdom and witness of these Black women who have really set at the foundation of the liberation struggle and articulated and imagined the reality that even Black men didn't want to hear.
That's it.
So how about we do that first? But then also as educators, I want to call educators to the front and center. right? Because I believe that one of the most important professions is education, right? We will literally have the next generation of leaders in our classroom. And Parker Palmer said something. He says, teaching mirrors the soul. He said, you teach who you are, right? This reality is that we merely teach and reproduce everything that we are. And I think that as educators, we need to take a responsibility upon ourselves, especially white folks, to be willing to use Google, like Monica said, and figure out, and just type in critical race theory, or type in abolitionist practice or teaching. Stop relying upon Black folks that carry the weight of your fragility. I had to tell a student today, like, I refuse for you to be the beach that is the recipient of the wave of this white fragility and tears that's getting ready to happen in this meeting. So I want white folks to take a level of initiative and agency for their own learning. And then I want Black folks to realize that we have a lot of work to do to change the way that we see ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important standpoint to start to think about and to consider.
Because we all work in higher education, and I know that some folks have asked kind of how we begin this journey in higher education. There is a book, it's called Ebony and Ivy.
Yes.
It's by Craig Stephen Wilder.
Yes.
And you need to, if you work in higher education,
You got to read that.
you need to read this book. You need to read this book because you need to know about the Black bodies, the Native and Indigenous bodies, for some spaces, the Asian and Pacific Islander bodies on which American higher education is built. As a complex, these spaces were not only built by Black hands, and I often say this, in higher education, they talk about, parentes and loci, how the faculty in the beginning were also the faculty, the student life, the student development. They were basically the parents for these young, affluent white boys who were sent to these college campuses to grow up essentially and go into either the ministry or whatever other form or trade they were sending them into, right? But when they talk about how faculty, they're talking about white men being the end all be all for the institution, but that's not true.
Mm-mm.
College campuses had Black folk on them, cooking, cleaning, feeding, nursing, raising these people.
Used for sport and entertainment, singing and dancing, all that.
Yep.
So if you can still look at your institutions up from their bootstraps situation and not see somebody else was tying the boots and being the flow to walk on, then you really don't want to know. At this point, you really don't want to know. There's no need for me to use my Black body to educate you. There's no need for Black students, Native students, Latinx students, Asian students in these classrooms to be the whipping dogs for which young white folk come to learn about the rest of the world around them.
My God.
And truth be told, that is our standard operation in higher education. When we want campuses to be better, we increase the number of students of color, not because we care about there being an increase in students of color, but we assume that the overall picture would be one that would be better because the bodies of those people of color have been sacrificed for the upliftment of society. And I'm not talking crazy. I'm just saying what I know. I'm saying what I know because of what I've been. In the second grade, I was a social studies project, honey.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing in these black folks to this white school. This was a social experiment.
Yeah.
How many people are saying, oh, our kids are going to be such great human beings because they go to a school that's so diverse?
Yeah.
That means that the learning for your child is going to come by them practicing out these things with these underrepresented bodies. Just think about that for a moment.
Mm.
That's our current narrative. And if we can use Black children as tools in kindergarten, elementary school, high school, college, on football fields, NCAA, then why would we be surprised when other people treat them as tools in the street? What happened to the brother Arbery, to Sister Taylor, to brother Floyd is not an element of what began in those transactional relationships in those spaces. It is the element of how we have been conditioned to see Black bodies in this country. When they brought us on the slave ships, their initial intent in 1619 was not that we were going to come together, build relationships, and multiply. They thought they were going to work us until we died. And when we died, they was going to go get some more and bring them over here. The country never saw us as human.
Yes.
They never saw us as living and breathing organisms that required sustenance. They saw us as things to be used and thrown away.
Yes, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Come on,
so
Monica.
we see it happening in the streets. You can't just fix it by going to fix police. You can't fix it by going to say, well, we just gonna vote these people out. And as much as I believe, I got my shirt on that say stroll to the polls, I believe that we should use our voting power. We're not gonna get a revolution by putting somebody else in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
We're not gonna get a revolution by putting somebody else in position as governor or mayor. Specifically, if the rest of the world, the rest of this organism ain't gonna change. So I'm a hush.
No.
You right. You in the right.
What's your cash app so they can get right?
What's your cash app?
Oh, send it to Navion so I can be free. Dude.
That's a system of oppression if it ain't one, ain't it?
Jesus.
So she can leave me alone. She used to be Sally Mae.
Sally Mae.
Her name thinking I don't know who she is.
Oh, we know. We see you, Sally. You
Call from a block number. I know you. So can we do one thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would love it if each of us would go around and give our folks some hope right now, because folk don't see it right now. People don't see it, and I might be some people. So what I'm going to say to my siblings in the struggle, I don't want to put a gendered title on it because I got siblings of all shape, form, and fashion, of all mind and design. And I want my people to know that you have the authority to turn off if you want. You do not have to give of yourself, of your time, of your body, of your fight in the struggle, specifically if you ain't got it to give. I used to tell my students in the Freshman Leadership Academy that you can't pour from an empty cup. But if we all the way honest, ain't nothing but a speck of something in the cup in the first place. I ain't got it to give. That does not make you a bad person. It does not mean that you do not want or deserve justice or equality. If you need to watch cat videos, watch cat videos. If you need to be on the Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, if it's your password or you done borrowed your cousin's password, do what you got to do to feel whole. because you deserve that.
Mm.
And if justifying your humanity to people that you may know or don't know on social media, in the streets, or whatever else is not what you want on your to-do list, then don't do that thing. You don't have to. You are not required to give of your body to soothe someone's fancy. So take care of yourself and walk in your authority and be your own kind of bliss. That's what I got. Now, Brother Humphrey.
I'm not about to preach, but I'm gonna say this. I love that, Monica. Like, take care of yourself. Choose to take from our woman sisters, Black feminist sisters. Choose when and where you enter, right? But at the same time, I want to say that there is hope in us embracing the interconnectedness of it all. Like, we will be free when we realize that racism, sexism, classism, all these isms are interconnected. So if we want to pursue an agenda of liberation and freedom building, we need to develop coalitions that desire to disrupt and to look at how all of these things impact each other. But what I want to say to Black folks in particular, I want to remind you that you come from an ancestral heritage of resistors. That DNA is in your very core, rooted in resistance. Contrary to what these white history books tell you, our ancestors carried with them rich legacies, rich practices, rich cultures of resistance and expression and living and being, even in the midst of forces that sought to swallow them up whole and spit out an image of whiteness and civility. I want to tell you that your ability to be free is in your soul. That your ancestors have modeled for us. Listen, even on the plantations, contrary to what white history books told us, even though slave owners tried to beat us into submission, tried to beat us into this notion of the ideal servant, we still resisted. We still determined, we still learned, we still developed our own religious practices. We developed spirituals, you know what I'm saying? We developed modes of communication. If our ancestors can survive chattel slavery, if our ancestors can survive Jim and Jane Crow, we can survive this, but we won't survive it unless we come together. That means straight Black folks need to reach out to queer and trans Black folks, and we need to lock hold, and we need to say, how can we advocate and do this work together? Because we're a movement by ourselves, but we're forced with we together.
We're together. Listen,
I love y'all. I love Black people.
From the book of
I love
Family.
y'all too. And on that note, may the Lord watch.
20 minutes.
While we're absent, one from another, let every heart say,
Yeah, man.
I love y'all.
I love
Thanks
y'all.
for watching. Bye.